for millionaires accusing President Obama of class warfare. Meanwhile, over the weekend, the financial district in New York City was flooded by protesters. Democracy Now!'s Sam Alkoff was there and filed this report.
On Saturday, thousands of protesters took to the streets of downtown Manhattan for what was described as an action to occupy Wall Street. Inspired by the popular uprisings of the Arab Spring and the European anti-austerity movements, Adbusters, a Vancouver-based culture-jamming magazine, put out a call for Saturday's protest on Wall Street in July. The goals were various, from limiting corporate contributions to political campaigns, to auditing the Federal Reserve, to challenging all of global capitalism. Protesters included 71-year-old Mary Ellen Marino of Princeton, New Jersey.
I came because I'm upset with the fact that the bailout of Wall Street didn't help any of the people holding mortgages. All the money went to Wall Street, and none of it went to Main Street. Now, we've just learned that Geithner was actually asked to split up the Citibank, and he didn't do it, and Obama didn't do anything about it.
The plan wasn't simply for a one-day protest, but an ongoing and creative occupation of the financial district itself. Organizer Lorenzo Serna.
The idea is to have an encampment. Like, this isn't a one-day event. Like, we're hoping that people come prepared to stay as long as they can, and then we're there to support each other.
But on Saturday, after hundreds arrived, the NYPD shut Wall Street down itself, barricading activists off from Wall Street and forcing a move to the nearby Zuccotti Park. Despite sometimes tense standoffs with the police, hundreds slept in the park and have maintained that they will stay until their demands are met. Prominent backers of the effort to occupy Wall Street included comedian Roseanne Barr.
These are the people who decimated our economy and caused all the problems in the world. They're on Wall Street.
Like many others, Marino says she took to the streets because of how the financial crisis has devastated her own family.
My particular interest is not this big picture, but it's the little picture. I have two daughters. Both of them have Citibank mortgages. And during this 2-year period when they were supposed to be helping people that were in danger of foreclosure, they did not refinance these mortgages, either one of my children. And one of the children had a house that was then worth half of its original value. She had put a $45,000 down payment to buy this condominium, and it was worth half of what she paid for it. And so when she lost her job for the second time during this crisis, she had to abandon the house. She's now without a house, without a job. My other daughter and her husband are struggling very much to maintain their mortgage, and I've had to go back to work. I'm going to be 72 in October, and I've had to go back to work full-time in order to help my children.
That report by Democracy Now!'s Sam Alkoff. Special thanks to Democracy Now!'s Ryan Devereaux, Dina Guzder, and John Gerberg, all on the Democracy Now! Team covering the Occupy Wall Street protest. We're going to go right now live to the protests. We're joined on the phone by Nathan Schneider, editor.
Who they are just to wear a uniform. We are better than that.
And 7 more people have been arrested in the ongoing Occupy Wall Street protests in downtown New York. Protest organizer Justin Weddis was among those detained.
This morning I was detained because I was speaking on a megaphone during an emergency General Assembly when the NYPD began to raid our peaceful encampment here at Occupy Wall Street. I was released later with no criminal charges, and several other of my comrades have been detained, some released again with no criminal charges, and some still being held detained with no charges. We want to reiterate that this is a peaceful encampment, and we will continue and always remain peaceful. But we tell the NYPD that the world is watching and that you need to remain peaceful. You need to remain professional and courteous like you have been so much of this time, and protect us as you're meant to do, not be violent with us.
The internet giant Yahoo has come under criticism, meanwhile, after reports surfaced it had blocked messages related to ongoing protests on Wall Street. On Monday, the company apologized, saying the blockage was unintentional and has been resolved. A rendition of John Lennon's Imagine at the Occupy Wall Street encampment in downtown New York. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Yes, it's day 10 of the Occupy Wall Street campaign. On Saturday, more than 80 protesters were arrested as hundreds took part in yet another march to Wall Street. The New York Police Department used nets and physical force to break up the crowds. Videos uploaded to YouTube show officers pepper spraying protesters in the face from close range, punching demonstrators and dragging people through the street. Since Saturday, September 17th, thousands, inspired by popular uprisings from Spain to the Arab Spring, gathered near Wall Street to decry corporate greed. On Sunday, protesters issued a communique calling for the resignation of the New York Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly and a dialogue with Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Ryan Devereaux and John Gerberg of have double the number of reporters there.
Oh, my God.
But at the beginning of this, very little coverage. This is day 12. And I wanted to talk about what happened this past weekend. The New York Police Department's handling of the arrests of 80 protesters over the weekend. That's come under fire as a number of videos have emerged showing officers using heavy-handed tactics, to say the least. Protesters captured some of the attacks on video, including the arrest of a 21-year-old Bronx resident named Iro Vincent. He was trying to calm the crowd and organize people to leave. This is a clip from after he was released from jail.
That's when the police just charged at me with his fist and just started, swinging at me. And another policeman pushed me, and I'm backing up. And as I'm backing up, I hit the barricade, and then I look at them, they come at me. I go over, and then 4 policemen just started, beating on me, yelling at me, stop resisting arrest, while I'm just laying there. I'm not fighting back. They kicked me in my stomach, knocked the breath out of me, hit me with their baton. They put their knees into my face, not in my head, into my face, into the ground, and just laughing.
While other demonstrators were charged with blocking traffic and resisting arrest, Vincent faces the most serious charge of assaulting a police officer. The NYPD says they acted appropriately, but Vincent says he's confident the videos of the attack will exonerate him and has vowed to continue participating in the Occupy Wall Street protest.
If there's anything called the epitome of a struggle, me and my family lived it. We were foreclosed on. My father had trouble finding a job, still hasn't found one. I had trouble finding a job, still haven't found one. My sister's in college, her tuition's doubling. They're trying to fight for her financial aid. We struggle with food. I've even slept on the bench for a few nights before this occasion, So, I'm here for everybody in my family, not just myself, and everybody who goes through the same struggles that I can empathize with.
Michael, your comments on Iro Vincent and all that are down there.
Well, it's highly ironic that now over 100 of the protesters have been arrested.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Here in New York, the Occupy Wall Street protests in the financial district took a dramatic turn this weekend when protesters tried to march across the Brooklyn Bridge Saturday. Their demonstration quickly turned into one of the largest arrests of nonviolent protesters in U.S. history. Democracy Now!'s Ryan Devereaux was on the bridge as protesters first encountered police. This is the report he called in. You have to listen closely.
They
Democracy Now!'s Ryan Devereaux calling in a report from the Occupy Wall Street protest on the Brooklyn Bridge. Ultimately, more than 700 people were arrested by the New York Police Department. Some protesters claim police lured them onto oncoming traffic on the bridge's roadway. Others said they did not hear instructions from police telling them to use the pedestrian walkway. One of the participants in the demonstration, who gave his name as Aaron G., told Democracy Now! What he saw happen.
What happened yesterday is we were marching, as you know, and a group of people were funneled by the police off into the road. So there were police up in front of us, and we were marching. So as we were going down, we were assuming that the police were clearing the path for us to march. So they were like clearing the road, and they were up in front of us. So we were following them, and then all of a sudden they cut off about like 700 of us, and then they cut it off. And then as we were walking, we stopped, and the police were in front of us, and they blockaded us. And then they blockaded us from the back. And they were telling the front to turn around and go back, and they were telling the back to turn around and go frontward. So they were like, people were getting squished in the middle because no one knew what to do. And then eventually they brought out these orange nets, and they circled us, and they just did a mass arrest on the bridge.
Occupy Wall Street movement, now entering its 17th day, draws inspiration from the Arab Spring. According to its website, the protest consists of, quote, people of many colors, genders, political persuasions. The one thing we all have in common is that we are the 99% that will no longer tolerate the greed and corruption of the 1%, end quote. The encampment received a boost last week when one of New York City's largest unions, the Transit Workers Union, announced its backing. Labor unions in the city plan a solidarity march with Occupy Wall Street this Wednesday. Meanwhile, most of the 700 people arrested Saturday have since been released, but were given citations for disorderly conduct and a criminal court summons. Similar occupation protests have spread to other cities, including Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, where hundreds of protesters are now camped out in front of City Hall.
I'm participating in Occupy LA, staying to camp here at the City Hall in Los Angeles overnight and probably until Monday. It's time that the top 1% is accountable for their actions.
Wall Street and the corporations believe that they have everybody fooled, and it's very obvious, as you can see, is how many people are here, how many people are all over the United States as well as all over the country, all over the world. We're not blind, and we know exactly what's going on.
Shabab withdrew its forces from Mogadishu in August. Here in New York, the ongoing protest against corporate greed and economic equality, known as Occupy Wall Street, is entering its 19th day with increasing union support. On Monday, the SEIU 1199 Healthcare Workers Union issued a statement of support for the demonstration, promising to help feed protesters and send nurses to train those providing first aid. The Healthcare Workers Union joins the New York's Transit Workers Union in supporting the growing movement. On Monday, attorneys for the TWU attempted to obtain a temporary federal restraining order to prevent the police from commandeering buses operated by its members to ferry protesters who'd been arrested. Over the weekend, the NYPD used at least 3 city buses to transport some of the over 700 protesters arrested attempting to cross the Brooklyn Bridge. Tony Murphy is an activist with the Bail Out the People movement.
We're here to say that the NYPD and Mayor Bloomberg has to keep their hands off Occupy Wall Street, stop harassing them, stop with the mass arrests. Liberty Plaza, which is the center of Occupy Wall Street, is a stone's throw away from Goldman Sachs. If they want to arrest somebody, they should go down to Wall Street, down to the stock exchange, and arrest the people who are busy clearing out elderly people from their homes, hurting people's pensions. These are the people who are really hurting people and should be arrested.
The unions and protesters are gearing up for a march on Wednesday that will be bolstered by walkouts at major universities at New York University, as well as City University of New York. Similar occupation demonstrations are springing up in cities around the country, from Austin, Texas to Knoxville, Tennessee, Chicago, Denver, over 24 locations in Florida and California, and more. Actions have also been organized internationally in Canada, Australia, Japan, Mexico, and other. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thousands of people flooded downtown New York Wednesday for the Occupy Wall Street movement's largest protest to date. With labor unions and students joining en masse, tens of thousands marched from Foley Square to Liberty Plaza, the site of the protest encampment where hundreds have been sleeping for nearly 3 weeks.
A nurse in New York. I've been coming here for the last 2 weeks, before work, after work, during lunch break, to support the Occupy Wall Street, to stand up against what's going on with bailing out the banks, bailing out Wall Street, while working class and middle class Americans in New York suffer and struggle to pay our bills and to find employment.
Never in the history of our world has this much wealth been concentrated in so few hands, and it's just out of control. And finally, people are waking up and saying no. And personally, I find it really insulting when I hear the term class warfare.
The march was peaceful, but police later beat a handful of protesters with batons after they toppled a police barricade in an attempt to march down Wall Street. Police say a total of 28 people were arrested. Smaller protests against Wall Street are continuing or being planned across the country in cities including San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, Boston, Seattle, and St. Louis. The Occupy Wall Street march evoked immediate comparisons to economic justice and anti-austerity protests worldwide, including the ongoing demonstrations in Greece. On Wednesday, thousands of people gathered in Athens as part of a general strike. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Actions inspired by New York's Occupy Wall Street continue to spring up across the United States. As of Friday morning, the website Occupy Together, a hub for nationwide events in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street, reported gatherings in 840 cities. On Thursday, activists in Washington, D.C. kicked off the October 2011 protests by occupying Freedom Plaza.
Stop investing in privatization. We need to start worrying about the 99% of the population. We need to start investing our money into social welfare programs and worrying about the middle to lower class, because we are not truly a great nation until all of us are strong and all of us are prosperous.
Well, I'm so appalled at the lies that go on at every level, and this was something I could do. Some of my friends say that it's just a replay of what we did during Vietnam, but you know, that did have some effect, and I'm really hopeful that this and the people at Wall Street, that this will actually move us to do something.
As in New York, demonstrators have come to Washington, D.C. from across the country, and some are taking part in their first-ever political demonstration. One woman who traveled from Kansas held a sign that read, quote, "Lost my job, found an occupation." In San Francisco, protesters are defiantly resisting a police attempt to break up an encampment in front of the Federal Reserve Bank. On Thursday, dozens of officers in riot gear surrounded the camp, removing tents, sleeping bags, and other items belonging to protesters. But organizers say over 100 people are still holding the area despite losing their belongings. At the White House, President Obama weighed in on the Occupy Wall Street protests for the first time. Speaking at a news conference, Obama said he understands the protesters' frustration, but ultimately believes in the financial sector.
I think it expresses the frustrations that the American people feel, that we had the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, and yet you're still seeing some of the same folks who acted irresponsibly trying to fight efforts to crack down on abusive practices that got us into this problem in the first place. So yes, I think people are frustrated, and you know, the protesters are giving voice to a more broad-based frustration about how our financial system works. Now keep in mind, I have said before, and I will continue to repeat, we have to have a strong, effective financial sector in order for us to grow.
President Obama, meanwhile, New York City's ongoing demonstration against Wall Street continued over the weekend by taking its message to a new location in Lower Manhattan and incorporating a 24-hour art exhibit on Wall Street itself. On Saturday afternoon, thousands of supporters gathered in Washington Square Park, north of the protesters' encampment in the financial district, for a General Assembly. The NYPD responded by dispatching large numbers of police and vehicles in an apparent attempt to prevent the protesters from establishing a second base of operations. Meanwhile, that evening, protesters gathered in the historic Morgan Building on Wall Street, the former headquarters of J.P. Morgan, for an art show comprised of work created by the protesters themselves, including protest signs that have been used in marches throughout the city in recent weeks. Meanwhile, Occupy protests continue to spread to scores of cities around the country. In Washington, D.C., Ralph Nader commented on the growth of the Occupy Wall Street movement while addressing a crowd in Washington, D.C.
There's an Occupy movement in every city, town, village, farmland in America, all linked, and all pursuing fair play, pursuing justice, pursuing decentralized power, pursuing what the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag ends with, which ought to get great emphasis, right? With liberty and justice for all.
The National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. was closed Saturday afternoon after security guards used pepper spray to repel over 100 demonstrators who were told they could not enter the building while carrying signs. The protesters from the Stop the Machine occupation targeted the museum because of an exhibit on drones. Immediately after the confrontation, the American Spectator, a conservative publication, posted an article by assistant editor Patrick Howley in which he revealed he'd consciously infiltrated the group of protesters in order to discredit their movement. Howley wrote the protesters lacked the nerve to confront authority and admitted to running through the lobby of the museum, provoking guards to use their pepper spray. In the piece, Howley calls the museum the scene of his crime and admits he was the only person to make it fully inside, despite orders from security guards. Meanwhile, authorities in Des Moines, Iowa, arrested 32 people who joined approximately 150 to 200 others occupying a local park in solidarity with the Occupy Wall Street movement. In Seattle, at least 3 people were arrested in connection with an occupation protest that's drawn hundreds to the city's downtown area. 14 protesters were arrested at a park in Sacramento, California, Sunday morning, days after police took more than 20 activists into custody. In an interview on ABC this week, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi expressed support for the Occupy Wall Street movement's message.
Well, I support the message to the establishment, whether it's Wall Street or the political establishment and the rest, that change has to happen. We cannot continue in a way that is not relevant to their lives. People are angry.
In protest news from Britain, more than 2,000 people staged a sit-down protest. Police raided the Occupy Boston encampment early this morning, arresting about 100 peaceful demonstrators in the latest crackdown on protests linked to the Occupy Wall Street movement. Some 200 police officers, including many in riot gear, approached the protest site at about 1:30 this morning. Police began making arrests after giving protesters 2 minutes to disperse. One Vietnam veteran said he was knocked to the ground during the arrests. Organizers of Occupy Boston said the police arrested a legal observer from the National Lawyers Guild and 4 medics who were attempting to care for protesters injured in the police raid. The arrest came hours after thousands of people marched in one of the largest protests organized by Occupy Boston. Many students from local colleges took part. Meanwhile, in Illinois, thousands took to the streets of Chicago in a solidarity protest with Occupy Wall Street. A coalition called Stand Up Chicago organized the march to protest the Futures Industry Association and the American Mortgage Bankers Association. Police arrested 26 demonstrators, many wearing Chicago Teachers Union T-shirts, who linked arms and sat down chanting, "Save our schools, save our homes." In New York, Mayor Michael Bloomberg suggested Monday protesters at Occupy Wall Street could stay indefinitely. He told reporters, quote, "The bottom line is people want to express themselves, and as long as they obey the laws, we'll allow them to." Today is day 25 of the protest encampment in New York. It also looks like protests may continue indefinitely in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Park Police have agreed to extend a permit to allow the Occupy 2011 Stop the Machine protest to continue in Washington's Freedom Plaza near the White House for the next 4 months. Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink, said she plans to protest until there's change.
We are here to stay. We're here just like we were here yesterday and the day before yesterday and the day before that. It really doesn't matter to us that our permit has run out. We feel like this is a public square. We are the public, and we are occupying the square, so we will stay here.
In economic news, a new study by the Congressional Budget Office has found President Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Occupy Wall Street protests continue in Lower Manhattan, along with parallel actions across the country. On Wednesday, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg told demonstrators they'll need to clear Liberty Plaza Friday for the square to be cleaned. In response, Occupy Wall Street organizers have issued a mass call for cleaning supplies and say they intend to clean the space themselves. Meanwhile, 4 protesters were arrested during a march to Chase Manhattan Plaza. Witnesses say the arrests were arbitrary and unnecessarily forceful.
Okay, they had 3 or 4 guys with masks on. The cops just swarmed them, and they chased them and threw them on the floor. Then they arrested an old man and an old lady right now for nothing, for absolutely nothing. And now they're trying to push us around, and, you know, they're just harassing us.
Hundreds of office workers, including cleaners, guards, and other building service workers, joined with the Occupy Wall Street marchers Wednesday to demand better pay and working conditions. Protesters have reportedly planned major actions for this Saturday, including a march on banks in the financial district, a student meetup in Washington Square Park, and a demonstration in Times Square. In San Francisco, roughly 200 supporters of the Occupy Wall Street movement temporarily shut down the headquarters of the Wells Fargo Bank, leading to 11 arrests. The demonstrators posted blown-up foreclosure notices on the doors of the bank, held up stickers reading, "We are the 99%.
I was just asking these police officers how they felt at this stage in their life of protecting the banks against the people. And they're trying to take the pensions from these cops the same as they're trying to do to us. United Airlines I work for, they took my pension. They took the pension of all the employees when they went into bankruptcy, and they terminated it. So the last thing in the world I'd be doing is standing at that doorway interfering with the right of these peaceful young people, with the right of assembly to protest what these banks have done to this society.
At least 7 people have been killed in a Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Occupy Wall Street protesters are celebrating in Lower Manhattan today after successfully defying orders to evacuate the encampment they've held for nearly 4 weeks. New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg had said Zuccotti Park, renamed Liberty Plaza by protesters, would have to be cleared following a request by its owners that it be cleaned. But protesters were also told they'd be barred from returning with the camping gear they've used to occupy the square, and around-the-clock action that's drawn international attention and sparked parallel actions nationwide. Thousands of people began congregating in the square earlier today in a show of defiance to the forced evacuation. Hours later, New York City officials announced the request to clear the park had been withdrawn. The decision led to cheers at Liberty Plaza, with protesters chanting their signature rallying cry, "We are the 99%. Meanwhile, in Denver, dozens of riot police have raided a park near the Colorado state capitol to break up a protest encampment after activists defied an evacuation order Thursday night. Dozens of protesters have remained near the park and are vowing to return. As the protests spread in the United States, more solidarity actions are planned around the world. Saturday, protesters in cities from London to Auckland, New Zealand, have organized rallies under the banner of October 15th. President Obama is vowing to seek new Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets Saturday in a global day of rage inspired by the Occupy Wall Street encampment. Protests reportedly took place in 1,500 cities, including 100 cities in the United States. The day's largest protest took place in Italy, where over 200,000 people took to the streets of Rome. While the protests were peaceful around the globe, in Rome, some people set cars ablaze and broke the window of banks and shops, sparking the country's worst riots in a decade. News reports said some of the 12 arrested for the riots were believed to belong to right-wing soccer fan groups, while others were linked to anarchist groups. In Britain, thousands of protesters marched on the London Stock Exchange.
The issue is global, so for the first time we have a truly global movement that is bringing together people from different countries, focusing on one aim, to change the financial system and how it interacts with governments, because we feel that we're not fairly represented through the democratic system as it is now, which seems to benefit a handful of banks as opposed to the 99% of the public.
Here in the United States, police arrested hundreds of people over the weekend at demonstrations and occupations inspired by the Occupy Wall Street movement, which began a month ago today in New York's financial district. In Illinois, police arrested about 175 Occupy Chicago protesters after they refused to leave Grant Park, the site of President Obama's election night victory rally. In Arizona, nearly 100 people were arrested at Occupy protests in Phoenix and Tucson. 19 members of Occupy Raleigh in North Carolina were charged with trespassing for refusing to leave the state capitol grounds. 24 protesters were arrested at Occupy Denver. In Washington, D.C., Princeton University professor Cornel West was among 19 people arrested on the steps of the Supreme Court during a protest against money in politics. And in New York, at least 92 people were arrested Saturday during a day of action that saw tens of thousands march to Times Square. Earlier in the day, about 24 people were arrested at a Citibank in Manhattan while they attempted to move their money out of the bank. The protesters were reportedly locked into the bank and then detained. Bank officials accused the protesters of being disruptive. Video shot outside the bank shows an undercover police officer dragging one woman into the bank and then arresting her.
They were inside. You were inside with everybody else.
I'm a customer.
You were inside. Yes, but you were inside.
I'm a
whole
customer.
No.
What are you doing?
What the hell?
What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Don't be dominant right now. He's not doing anything. He's not doing anything wrong. Oh my God. This is wrong. This is wrong. You're doing it wrong.
In a major development from Africa, hundreds of Kenyan troops backed by tanks and helicopter gunships have invaded southern Somalia and Kenya's A new poll by Quinnipiac University has found most New York City voters, including Republicans, want the city to allow the Occupy Wall Street protesters to stay in their encampment in the financial district. 72% of city voters, including 52% Republican, expressed support for the protesters as long as they continue to obey the laws. On Monday, thousands of protesters marked the beginning of the second month of the protest. Kobe Skolnick is an organizer with Occupy Wall Street.
Some people did not believe that it will grow so fast, but some of us really wanted it to grow fast. And as you see now, it's pretty widespread, at least in this nation and around the world. But around the world is not because of us. Each nation has its own problem with economic injustices.
Occupy Cincinnati protesters have sued police and city officials for violating their free speech rights. The protesters are challenging a city rule that bars gatherings after 10 p.m. at the downtown park they've occupied for more than a week. Meanwhile, Seattle police officers and park employees raided the Occupy Seattle encampment Monday. 150 tents were taken down, 8 people arrested. And There have been a number of developments at protests inspired by Occupy Wall Street. Protesters at Occupy Main in Portland were attacked Sunday morning when a chemical bomb was thrown into the encampment. Police said the homemade bomb, made up of chemicals poured into a plastic Gatorade container, could have caused serious injury. In Texas, 23 activists with Occupy Dallas were arrested Monday for blocking the entrance to a Chase bank, while other activists attempted to close their Chase accounts. In Albany, New York, protesters are continuing to camp across the street from the New York State Capitol. On Sunday, local police refused to remove the protesters from the park in defiance of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the city's mayor. One police official said, quote, "These people were not causing trouble. The bottom line is the police know policing, not the governor and not the mayor." In Illinois, members of Occupy Chicago and a group of nurses protested outside City Hall and the offices of Mayor Rahm Emanuel Monday, one day after Chicago police arrested 130 people, including many nurses, at Occupy Chicago. Meanwhile, in California, police are threatening to raid Occupy Oakland. A tweet posted just as we've been going to air said police and riot gear have surrounded the protest encampment and have begun firing flash grenades and rubber bullets into the camp. Rise in income inequality. Oakland police repeatedly fired tear gas and flash grenades Tuesday night as protesters attempted to retake Occupy Oakland encampment outside City Hall. The protests began 12 hours after police conducted a pre-dawn raid on Occupy Oakland's site, arresting nearly 100 protesters. The detained protesters are being held on $10,000 bail. We'll have more from Oakland after headlines. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, police have arrested more than 50 protesters who'd been camping out in Woodruff Park for the past 2 weeks. Over 2,500 people have now been arrested across the country since the Occupy Wall Street movement began. Here in New York, over 100 students, teachers, educational activists occupied a New York City Board of Education meeting Tuesday night to protest the city's education policies, including budget cutbacks, layoffs, large class sizes, and an overemphasis on standardized testing. After New York School's Chancellor Dennis Walcott and school board members fled the meeting, an impromptu General Assembly was held. Speakers included an 8-year-old student named Indigo. To Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Marches were held in Oakland, New York, and other cities Wednesday night to protest Tuesday's violent crackdown on the Occupy Oakland movement. Many protesters expressed outrage over the shooting of Oakland protester Scott Olson, a 24-year-old Iraq War vet who fractured his skull Tuesday night when he was hit in the head by a police projectile in Oakland. He's hospitalized in critical condition, is reportedly still unconscious. Video posted online shows a police officer threw a flash grenade at a group of protesters who attempted to care for Olson after he was hit by the projectile. Here in New York, hundreds of Occupy Wall Street demonstrators held an unpermitted march Wednesday night to show solidarity with Oakland. New York police said they arrested about a dozen people. Patrick Bruner is an organizer with Occupy Wall Street.
Behind me, you can hear people chanting, New York is Oakland, Oakland is New York. And this is because we firmly believe that this is a worldwide problem, that this is an American problem. It is not just a problem with New York City. It is not just a problem with Oakland. Police are violent everywhere. The system is broken everywhere.
While the police crackdown in Oakland has made international news, the Washington Post is coming under criticism for how it covered the story. On Wednesday, it ran a story titled, "Protesters Wearing Out Their Welcome Nationwide." Above the photo was a photo of a police officer petting a cat. The caption read, "A police officer in Oakland, California, pets a cat that was left behind by Wall Street protesters who were evicted from the grounds of City Hall." In news from Washington, D.C., Reuters is reporting Democratic lawmakers on the so-called Super Committee.
And I want to apologize to everyone about what happened.
At the White House, Press Secretary Jay Carney was asked about the police crackdown in Oakland.
we understand the frustrations that are being expressed, specifically with regard to the need to make sure that Main Street and Wall Street operate by the same set of rules, and the general frustration with the need for jobs and economic growth that creates opportunity for middle-class Americans. And certainly we have a long and noble tradition of free expression and free speech in this country. It's also important that laws are upheld and obeyed. But that's a broad view. I haven't had a discussion about specific cities or instances with the president.
In other Occupy news, police in Nashville, Tennessee, and San Diego, California, have raided Occupy Wall Street encampments early in the morning. At least 30 people were arrested in Nashville. The activist Cotton Candy of the All People's Revolutionary Front Coalition witnessed the raid in San Diego.
Cops started coming in, and the media wasn't allowed to get in. I couldn't even get in. And then they started arresting people one by one. And then they started arresting the media. They arrested one of the media folks, I think the whole thing. And they arrested one of the organizers, Callie, as well. The cops started moving in, and then they started backing out of the area, like setting up like almost like an army line. So they were starting to walk down the street and lining up as though they were calling out platoon lines. They even called it platoons. They're like, platoon 1. And then they backed up, platoon 2, and then platoon 3. They were literally like army lines.
Meanwhile, in Arizona, the total number of people arrested at Occupy Tucson have now surpassed 350 since the protests began in the city 2 weeks ago. Here in New York, organizers say thousands of Occupy Wall Street demonstrators will march today to the headquarters of Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, and J.P. Morgan Chase. A new study released Thursday The Occupy Wall Street movement continues to face government crackdowns nationwide with a series of arrests over the weekend. In Denver, riot police fired pepper balls and mace into a crowd of protesters after they attempted to move onto the state capitol grounds. Some 20 people were arrested, including 13 who tried to erect a tent in an adjacent park. The arrests followed a peaceful march that drew thousands of people into the streets of Denver. Roughly 30 people were arrested in Portland, Oregon, after they remained in an upscale park beyond curfew hours. Meanwhile, police in Austin, Texas, arrested 39 demonstrators for attempting to maintain food tables at their City Hall encampment. In Tennessee, a night court magistrate has refused to sign off on an arrest warrant targeting demonstrators because he argued state officials have no authority to set the curfew. Among those arrested in Nashville over the past week was a reporter for the Nashville Scene who identified himself to officers as a member of the media. The reporter, Jonathan Madork, caught his arrest on camera.
Whoa, whoa. You had your time. I'm a member of the media. You had your time. I'm a member, I'm a member of the media. You're resisting arrest. Tell him when you get him up there, charge him with resisting arrest. Yes, sir.
In Oakland, California, an Iraq War veteran is continuing to recover from serious brain injury he sustained while attending a protest last week. Scott Olson has been communicating with friends and family at his bedside by writing notes, but reportedly cannot speak. Friends say the 24-year-old is expected to make a full recovery. Meanwhile, protesters in Oakland are reportedly planning to occupy the office of Oakland Mayor Jean Quan today. The demonstrators are seeking the return of medical supplies seized in a police raid last week. Here in New York City, Occupy Wall Street protesters endured a weekend of freezing, wet, snowy weather as their ongoing occupation of a financial district plaza entered its 6th week. Combating the elements was made all the more difficult after the New York City Fire Department confiscated the encampment's gas power generators on Friday morning.
The spirit is not going to die. This is just the start of the movement. The movement is going to keep going. Winter, rain, shine, or cold, we're going to be out here to make sure this works because 99% of the people deserve a better condition in this country. And if we don't march now, when?
I think it's going to actually grow. Already I'm noticing people are handing out hand warmers, socks, ponchos, blankets, and this is just the start. And I think the more there's tactics that are being used to try and take away the warmth, like taking away the generators, supposedly for our safety, the more people are going to react to that, and they're going to just provide more things. We're going to find ways to make it work.
The weekend began for Occupy Wall Street activists in New York with a march on the offices of major banks in Midtown Manhattan. At the headquarters of J.P. Morgan Chase, office workers filled the windows taking pictures of the demonstrators down below.
I think the people up there are workers and middle-class America for the most part, just like everybody that's here today. It's the people on the top floor that need to hear the message. And I think the message is trickling up.
Occupy protests also continue across the globe. On Saturday, thousands of people marched in the financial district of the German city of Frankfurt. Meanwhile, in London, a coalition of Christian protesters has made plans to form a prayer ring around demonstrators encamped outside St. Paul's Cathedral. Efforts to evict the protesters have led to a storm of controversy, with both St. Paul's canon chancellor and a chaplain stepping down over the decision to pursue legal action against the camp. The Syrian government has carried out Police in Richmond, Virginia and Palm Desert, California have raided encampments of Occupy Wall Street protesters. In Richmond, police arrested 9 demonstrators and demolished their camp with bulldozers scooping tents and other items into dump trucks. In Palm Desert, California, at least 7 Occupy protesters were arrested in an early morning crackdown. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, a federal judge has ordered the state to drop enforcing new rules that restrict demonstrators' ability to protest. Demonstrators began occupying Legislative Plaza in Nashville on October 9th. Just 3 weeks later, the state enacted new rules without any public review, eliminating their right to gather after 4 p.m. and implementing a 10 p.m. curfew. In other Occupy news, wounded Iraq War veteran Scott Olson reportedly gave a thumbs up to his roommate after being told of the support he'd received from Occupy demonstrators around the world. The 24-year-old suffered a cracked skull and brain swelling after Oakland police fired tear gas into a crowd of protesters last Tuesday. His injury led to anti-police brutality marches and vigils around the country. Olson's still unable to speak and has been communicating to family and friends with a notepad he keeps next to his hospital bed. Members of the UN down by 68% from a quarter-century ago. The Occupy Wall Street encampment and protest movement has entered its 8th week. Here in New York, protesters will be hosting their first Spokes Council meeting today, a development in the decision-making process for the movement. Meanwhile, police continue to crack down on Occupy protesters across the country. In Florida, 13 people were arrested Sunday while attending a First Amendment teach-in in Orlando. At least 24 people have been arrested over the last 2 days in Atlanta, Georgia, including 5 people early this morning. In California, police arrested 11 protesters in Riverside while breaking up the protest encampment. Meanwhile, protests were held across the country Saturday to mark Bank Transfer Day, a campaign to move accounts from big banks into community banks or credit unions. Former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich spoke at Occupy Los Angeles after the Bank Transfer Day march.
Because of Occupy LA and the Occupy movement around America, this country is beginning to discuss an issue and a set of issues it has avoided discussing for years. And that is the increasing concentration of income and wealth and political power at the very top of this country, and what that has done to the economy and what that has done to our democracy.
In other news from California, Guardian newspaper
win it and get it over with.
Occupy Oakland protesters are bracing for a morning raid today. Hundreds of protesters have assembled to defend the Occupy Oakland encampment. The fear of eviction comes after a series of requests to vacate were issued from City Hall and local businesses. On Thursday, a 25-year-old man who had spent a few days in the park was attacked and shot to death by two unidentified individuals. The killing exacerbated existing tensions between the encampment and city officials. Oakland's reportedly agreed to pay for up to 1,000 officers to be deployed over the next 3 days, making it the largest and most expensive police operation in the city in recent memory. Meanwhile, police in Portland, Oregon, encountered an estimated 1,000 Occupy protesters Sunday afternoon, making over 50 arrests in an attempt to shut down their weeks-old encampment. Nearly a dozen law enforcement agencies dispatched over 300 officers for the eviction after Mayor Sam Adams ordered the camp shut down. Here in New York, Occupy demonstrators held a Veterans Day march through Lower Manhattan Friday. The march ended at Civic Center Park, where a number of musicians, including Joan Baez, performed.
Let's drink to the low.
Move, while the Pentagon and CIA seem to support it. The University of California, Davis has announced it's placed 2 police officers on administrative leave after they were videotaped pepper spraying a group of student protesters. The students were peacefully sitting down cross-legged with their arms locked when the officers began pepper spraying them at point-blank range. The students were protesting the dismantling of the Occupy UC Davis encampment that was set up in the school's quad area. We'll speak to one of the students pepper sprayed later in the broadcast. Meanwhile, Robert Haas, the former poet laureate of President Obama was in New Hampshire Tuesday to tout his economic stimulus plan, including a jobs bill and an upcoming vote to preserve a payroll tax cut. Shortly after taking the stage, Obama was mic-checked by Occupy Wall Street protesters criticizing the ongoing crackdown on demonstrators across the country.
Okay, it's okay. That's all right. Listen, I'm going to be talking about a whole range of things today, and I appreciate you guys making your point. Let me go ahead and make
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Police in Los Angeles are clearing out a downtown protest encampment in the latest in a series of raids on Occupy Wall Street-related sites nationwide. More than 1,000 police officers in riot gear descended on the encampment around Los Angeles City Hall shortly after midnight. Scores of people were arrested as police tore down the tents around the site. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, around 100 protesters vacated their encampment earlier today after police moved in and warned them of mass arrests. We'll have more on the raids in Los Angeles and Philadelphia later in the broadcast. The Senate has advanced a controversial measure that would authorize the military to jail anyone it considers a terrorism suspect. Back Back in the United States, the total number of arrested in the raids on Occupy encampments in Los Angeles and Philadelphia early Wednesday morning has now topped 350 people. 300 were arrested when around 1,400 officers raided the Occupy LA site at City Hall. 50 people were arrested when Philadelphia police cleared the protest camp at Dilworth Plaza. To date, over 5,000 people have been arrested in Occupy Wall Street crackdowns nationwide. In related news, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg boasted to an audience at MIT Tuesday night that the New York Police Department is his own personal army. Bloomberg said, quote, "I have my own army in the NYPD, which is the 7th biggest army in the world." The mayor has been accused of using New York City's massive police department as his own private force to clear out Occupy Wall Street protesters from their home base in Lower Manhattan and execute scores of arrests throughout the city. In Arizona, to 64%. 31 people were arrested at the Occupy site in Washington, D.C. Sunday after police dismantled a structure erected by protesters. Scuffles broke out after officers moved in on the structure while protesters remained on top, refusing to move. A demonstrator criticized the arrests.
Non-issue. 5 people shouldn't have been arrested already. What should have happened is they should have said, you know, this is larger than we intended when we gave you permission to build a structure. They should have changed the stipulations on their rules, and then they should have come back in 3 days. But there's no reason for this to be happening right now at all.
Italy. Of activists are gathering in Washington, D.C. for a week-long protest dubbed Take Back the Capitol from Corporate Control. A series of demonstrations and sit-ins are expected to protest corporate influence over the political process. Organizers say they expect many attendees from the Occupy encampments that have been shut down in recent weeks nationwide. Arrests continued Monday, with 11 people detained at Occupy protests in Orlando and San Diego. The raids followed the weekend of arrests of 19 people in Portland and 16 people in Seattle. Around 100 protesters are facing eviction from their encampment at Seattle Central Community College after a judge ruled they can be displaced. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, members of Occupy LA rallied at City Hall Monday to protest the raid on their encampment last week. And at the Occupy camp in Washington, D.C., activists regrouped following the arrest of 31 people on Sunday.
My friend was grabbed by the throat by a cop.